Welcome to The World Today. I'm Waqas Majeed. Today our topic for discussion is the visit of the Army Chief to Balochistan recently. General Qamar stresses the national commitment to the development of Balochistan. So that's our first topic of discussion. We'll be discussing how far Balochistan has come, especially after the initiation of the CPAC project and how things are progressing in that matter. Our second topic is going to be the continuing Syrian nightmare. Unfortunately, the crisis seems to have no end in sight, and it is really a nightmare for the people of Syria, and it has also many repercussions of expanding to a greater theater within the Middle East, and let's see how things are going to unfold there. So that will also be part of our discussion. So let's introduce our guests in the studio. Joining me for the discussion, first of all, we have Imtiaz Gulsab. He is a well-known defense analyst, and along with him, we have Javeed Sadiq Saab, who's a journalist. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. Sir, let's begin with the statement and the press release by the ISPR saying that the continuity of effort with national commitment is the way forward to bring about the desired development and stability in Balochistan. Could you, sir, decipher this elaborate statement coming from the ISPR?
Well, Waqas, it's no rocket science. We don't really have to decipher all these things. It's very self-evident. The objectives of development, peace, education for everybody is something that belongs to the Constitution, is enshrined in the Constitution of Pakistan. And people all over Pakistan, all citizens of Pakistan are entitled to all these. However, what is amazing is that it's always the military that seems to take the lead in issues such as water and infrastructure in troubled areas. So whereas it should have been the provincial government, the civilian federal authorities to really take the lead, the Army Chief had to do this. And I think we also saw that the Army Chief inaugurated a water center.
It was a road, sir.
A road? Plus also he is, I think, a water treatment plant has also been inaugurated, that too by the Army, I think with the support of Switzerland and another, probably a UAE or something. So this is quite heart-wrenching because the entire federal cabinet as well as the provincial cabinet is crying hoarse to say that Gwadar is going to be the jewel in the crown of the CPAC. And I've been speaking with a few people in Gwadar, the Gwadar town itself, and the conditions have been pathetic. The 2 years have passed since the CPAC in Gwadar emerged into the national conversation, and ever since the city has been going through a water crisis, electricity crisis, and what we hear is that even the grant that was given to Gwadar for the new airport is still lying somewhere. Only the design has been finalized for the new airport in the last 2 years. So that, I think, is a very poor reflection on the civilian authorities.
Or the overall state of governance, sir.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that overall state of governance does not reflect the kind of urgency that conflict hit areas or areas such as Gwadar require for accelerated development to stay in step with the Chinese expectations.
And wouldn't you lay the blame for that, sir, at the feet of political instability that we have been rocked by for quite some time now?
No, I don't think there is any political instability. It's a former prime minister that has been causing instability. His own party is in power. So he's acting both as opposition as well as the ruling party. So that is the most unfortunate aspect of one man who refuses to bow to the rule of law. I mean, who basically has dismissed the notion of accountability by dismissing the courts as a vehicle to accountability. And I think he has turned himself into a laughing stock just because the world over there's a very standard operating procedure. There are norms about transparency, about good governance and accountability, and they are based on judicial system. So just to rule out the judicial system just because it's against you is basically making a mockery of the oath that these people take when they become members of the parliament or when they become the prime minister or the ministers.
All right, sir. When we talk about Balochistan, Javeed Saab, we've been hearing for many decades about the unrest and the poor situation in Balochistan overall. If we recall back in the days of the PPP government, there was an Aghaze-Huquq-e-Balochistan package which was announced, and now today we have Khushhal Balochistan program. So why is there this huge gap of almost a decade and nothing has been achieved, despite all these efforts that have been made?
I think it's a sad commentary on the civilian governments, elected governments. We have heard very bizarre stories about the development process under the provincial governments. You know, there were bridges built on paper, payments made out, but on practice, on ground, there was no bridge and there were no roads. So the funds, development funds, were massively abused in the province of Balochistan under the civilian governments. And that is why the province has remained so backward, and the military from time to time had to step in to accelerate the developmental process. And at least the military has been able to establish some measure of peace and stability in that province. And the most of the elected members of the provincial assembly in the previous government, they were all cabinet members. So, you know, they were very happy with the perks and privileges of a minister, and they were getting development funds in a very generous manner. The former Prime Minister Zardari, whose Aghaze-Balochistan, the program that you have mentioned, it was initiated in his during his government, but on the ground, I think we didn't see any change. I mean, the people of Balochistan were not given their rights. No development, big development plans were seen being completed there. So this is a sad situation. And that is why I think the military had to accelerate its pace of development, or they had to intervene, or they started a developmental process on another track. And that is why I think we need to give credit to the military that when they are trying to bring about peace and stability in that situation, in that province particularly, it is a very sensitive province. We are also hearing that foreign powers like India and Afghanistan and others also intervene in that province, and you know, they are trying to keep that province aboil with trouble.
I'm glad you raised that point, sir, because earlier when we were talking about transparency and accountability, this is another factor, in your opinion, Imtiaz, do you think that the powers that are inimical to Pakistan, for example, certain intelligence organizations that are working against the interests of Pakistan, are also playing a negative role in the development aspect of the province? How would you talk about that?
Look, you know, there's a tendency to scapegoat Pakistan's problems always whenever there's trouble inside it. So you would point fingers at India or Afghanistan or a third country or even Iran. But we shall have to be honest to ourselves that there are problems, that there's been brazen neglect of certain issues. And I remember when the last National Finance Commission was negotiated in 2008-2009, under that, Balochistan's budget from the annual development plan at least tripled from 45 billion rupees in 2008 to 110 billion in 2009-2010, and it proportionally has been increasing. So if you keep that in mind, Balochistan has received at least 1,500 billion rupees in the last 10 years. Now the question is, where is that money? You don't see it on ground. You see it perhaps in the money stacked the way the National Accountability Bureau or the Army has stumbled upon those 700 million rupees at the house of former Finance Secretary. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So this is where the money went. So if we are not addressing the fundamental issues of development, of education, of health, of livelihoods, then obviously the enemy, whoever the enemy is, will try to exploit those fault lines. If the enemy doesn't exploit those fault lines, then it's a very stupid enemy, you know. So they will do whatever they can. The issue is, are we doing enough? Are we addressing the issues that the people of Balochistan or people of FATA face? This very government has shelved the program, for instance, the reforms of, or the plan of mainstreaming of FATA, federally administered tribal areas. And one wonders, why? Just because they wanted to pander to one party or two parties, one-man party in the National Assembly, Jamiat Ulama Islam and Pukhtunkhwa Milli Awami Party, they're two regional parties. So all I want to say that, yes, there are problems, but that doesn't stop you from addressing the issues on ground.
And sir, we also have to talk about the importance of Balochistan and specifically Gwadar when it comes to the CPAC project itself. Javeed Sahab, we also heard reports in the press that the Chinese were in talks with the disgruntled elements in the province and that there was some progress being made. We even had some statements coming in from government quarters or establishments saying that they welcomed those talks that were taking place between the Chinese and those disgruntled elements, but then there was a denial by the Chinese.
Yes,
there's a bit of confusion there, sir.
Yeah, the Chinese foreign ministry spokesman in a regular briefing denied these reports that they were in talks with the elements and to get their support for implementing the CPAC project in Balochistan. But unfortunately, we have not been able to create a safe, stable environment in Balochistan so that the foreign investor, the Chinese or anyone else who is interested in the development of that province, who wants to invest in that province, they should be given the assurance that the security situation is quite stable and they need not worry. But unfortunately, we have not been able to do it. So the Chinese, with their huge stakes in Balochistan and the CPAC being implemented there, and the crucial part of CPAC is to be implemented in Balochistan, they obviously are worried. And when I first saw this story in newspapers, it was no big surprise for me because they want their money and their investment to be sure and to be ensured. Later on, they denied it and they said that they have full confidence in Pakistan's security arrangements. And as we know, that the military has established a special protection force to give protection to the Chinese who are working in Balochistan. But despite that, I think we need to create an environment where the foreign investors, Chinese or anyone else, wants to invest or wants to be a part of the development of Balochistan, then he needs to be, or that country needs to be sure that they're not going to be disrupted or not going to be interrupted by miscreants or other forces which you said that inimical to Pakistan. But I think we need to do a lot, and we need to improve the environment politically and security-wise. And I think both the civilian and military government have to work hand in hand so that that situation is created. But the military has has always complained that they are moving very fast on their track, which is to bring stability and peace in that region. And the civilian government is not doing the work at the same pace. So they are left behind. So they have to be in tandem with each other.
What would you attribute this procrastination to, or is it just sheer incompetence, or what would you say the reasons for this failure are?
I think the incompetence also is one of the reasons. The other is that many civil servants from Federation, they are reluctant to go to troubled spots like Balochistan or for that matter FATA. They want to remain safe. And that's why they are reluctant. And very incompetent people, the people who do not have the experience of doing the developmental projects or taking risk, and therefore these people, things have been left to them. And that is one reason that these projects are not implemented. The corruption, which is so rampant everywhere in Pakistan, and it is very rampant and widespread in Balochistan because there is no accountability.
So let's talk about that. Recently, sir, we witnessed there was a debacle within the Balochistan government. The chief minister was sacked or had to go home because there was a no confidence motion against him. and then there were the Senate elections following that. How do you juxtapose these two events, sir? And do you think that they've also affected the way things are moving along in Balochistan?
No, I think we should not conflate two different things, because if we are talking about the backwardness or slow pace of development in Balochistan, then we really have to focus on what the federal government has done so far as CPAC is concerned. I think our officials, our ministers, leading people who matter, they haven't extracted good deals from Chinese, just in the overzeal to grab Chinese money and then also to benefit personally from that. They have simply gone without any real negotiations, and I think that's not going to be good in the long run for Pakistan. While we must be thankful to the Chinese for sticking their neck out, for parking their money here, for internal investments, and for opening new opportunities of livelihood, of production at the Gwadar Freeport zone. But we must also, I think, take cognizance of how, in what tardy fashion, our people, our ministers have negotiated those deals, and I think they simply sold Pakistan cheap. For the next 43 years, roughly 43 years, the Gwadar Freeport or Gwadar free zone, would not be paying anything to Pakistan at all, except for employing a few thousand people, locals. But the rest of the money, the product, will go to China as well as outside. And imagine what would happen to the environment in 43 years, to the surroundings.
Haven't we already witnessed something like that taking place when it was the Sandak project, sir? And
yeah, I know. Again, that was also a very bad deal. So all I'm saying is,
so we have a history.
I'm saying is
why don't we learn our lessons?
It's up to the elites. It's up to the ruling elites who are running this country to learn lessons. That's what I'm saying. That the devil is within, not outside. There are devils outside, but the devils within provide an opportunity to the external forces to exploit our fault lines. That's what I think my concern is as a Pakistani, that while we are singing CPAC everywhere, everybody is singing that song, there's not enough attention being paid to the details of the contracts, agreements that are happening under the CPAC.
Well, that's really unfortunate, sir, the way you put it, but is there a way to fix the situation? Javeed sir, would you like to suggest some remedial measures?
I think we need to pay attention to basically the money that is coming to Pakistan. CPAC is being touted as a game changer. And they're saying that the fate of the people of Pakistan and the entire region will change because of the CPAC. And people have to reap the benefits of these projects in the years to come. But I believe that, a lot of debate is going on. For instance, the long-term paper,
the long-term plan,
that needs to be unveiled to the people of Pakistan. The debate is still going on. The questions are being raised as to what is there, what lies in that long-term plan, and on what terms we are going to negotiate with Chinese on various projects, on various aspects of this project. And that is still a mystery. And
I'm glad you raised the issue of the long-term plan, sir, because one aspect of the plan is also developing Gwadar and Balochistan as a tourist hub.
Exactly.
Do you foresee that happening anytime in the future, sir?
Well, I guess
and if you look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia, they're also having this new thrust towards tourism, and they've opened up, and the whole trust.
Yeah, we shouldn't doubt the intentions of the Chinese. I think I have heard that they are now trying to market Gwadar through an exhibition in London. They are very clear in their vision. Somebody 3 years ago told me while I was in Shenzhen, one of the industrial, actually electronics hub in China, in southern China, that we will turn Gwadar into Shenzhen. So this was a very clear statement of intent by the Chinese officials. However, a lot depends on what our officials, what our leaders do. So this is, I guess this will come about, but if Pakistan did not recalibrate, did not pay enough attention to details, the Chinese may reprioritize this entire project, because we have to keep in mind, they have the money, they have a very business approach, just because they believe in trade, connectivity through trade, not through guns and through armaments.
Absolutely.
So if they believe, going by this philosophy, they would like Gwadar as well as its periphery to be peaceful, to be developed. And we believe them. They say now, because we have reached a certain level of economic progress, so we want to share the dividends of that progress with our periphery. That periphery includes Pakistan. And within Pakistan, the periphery of Balochistan is other provinces, whether it is the south or the east. So I think they're very clear in that. Our people are, I guess, not sincere, our leaders. They are very much focused on personal benefits.
Do you think it's insincerity or just plain incompetence, sir?
It's insincerity on the top, incompetence at the bureaucratic level. I have seen how bureaucracy works. There's a lot of incompetence. I think whatever plans we have right now under the CPAC, even for this, the PC1 came from the Chinese after they saw that the Pakistani officials were simply fiddling, playing with figures, and they were unable to come up with feasible projects. So the Chinese officials then took the matter in their own hand, and that's what led to then MOUs, and a lot of work that you see today is because of the Chinese. So all I think we need is intent, good intention, and of course coupled with competence. And there is no dearth of competence. However, the current governance regime, the planning commission regime, it's a 100-year-old planning regime, that will not help Pakistan. So I was actually reading somewhere that most of Pakistan is still running with the second generation.
Absolutely, sir. I went through that as well.
Whereas the world has moved to the fourth generation and fifth generation machinery. So that's a very sad comment on our political leadership, because by buying second generation machinery, they, I think, ensure maximum benefits for themselves. But this means they are putting the country backward, and which cannot then stay in step with the rest of the world, also with the countries around it, which are, I think, going for modern, new generation technologies, so that their productivity, efficiency, and proficiency increases.
We're very unfortunate, sir, and you're right about the sad comment that it is overall on our state of affairs. But let's talk about something positive, sir. Let's talk about the inauguration of the Turbat-Buleda road that the Chief of Army Staff did. He also carried out a groundbreaking for the construction of a cadet college in Awaran. He also spoke about the security measures and the support to the government on socio-economic projects. So how soon do you think that these intentions or projects are going to actually materialize and bear fruit for the people?
Ideally, they must be completed in the stipulated period of time, But unfortunately, the military, as the Chief of Army Staff inaugurated these projects, military is trying to increase the pace of development in Balochistan, because much depends on these projects. The cadet college that you have mentioned, previously in the areas from where we are getting this natural gas, at Sui and other areas, the military established cadet college, they established educational systems, schools, and they have played their part in a very effective and efficacious manner. They are providing education to the young people in Balochistan. They have built roads. They have actually completed a huge connection of roads and networks. So that's very important, and that plays a very significant role in the development of that province. The civilian government, on the other hand, the provincial as well as federal government, they are least interested, or they are not very sensitive to this aspect of the development of that province, which is so important, so vital to our economy and security both. So I think that given the pace of the military activity in that area, I mean, the pace with which the military wants to move in that province, because they want the security as well as the development to be at the same pace, and both tracks, the speed on the both tracks should be the same, but it is not the case. So if the military takes things in its own hands, if they complete this project, I mean the road project, most of the road projects in Balochistan have been done by FWO and other military organizations. The civilian authorities and the civilian governments do not have the capability and the capacity to complete these projects. And given the massive corruption there and incompetence, coupled with incompetence, it is very difficult that they complete the projects within the given stipulated period of time.
Well, there's no more room for me to ask any further questions on the subject, sir, because let's hope that the coordination, civil-military coordination to execute the Khushhal Balochistan program actually bears fruit, and sooner rather than later. So let's move on to our other subject, and that is a very tragic situation, sir. Let me just begin by outlining what is happening. 465,000 people have been killed in Syria, sir. 1 million have been injured, and over 12 million, that's half the country's population, has been displaced, either internally or have become refugees, sir. So coming after this Arab Spring, it doesn't seem that it is a spring at all. It seems to be a never-ending winter. So where are we headed, sir?
Yeah, this is so tragic that the democracy project basically has degenerated into a humanitarian crisis, and this was a project that was sponsored by all
the Western powers,
lead NATO countries as well as Saudi Arabia, plus Turkey as well. So the kind of human misery that this project has created, thrown up, is really tragic. And with the geopolitical influences coming from both sides, on the one hand you have the Russians and the Iranians supporting the Bashar al-Assad regime, and on the other hand Erdogan, the Turkish president, Saudi Arabia are pushing for his ouster. So that has actually created this humanitarian crisis, and somehow there still seems to be big disagreements between the two blocs, one led by the United States and the other led by Russia. But if you look at the way events have evolved, initially it was pretty obvious that all non-state actors against Bashar al-Assad were drawing their support from the US, from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey, and now see how they morphed, what they morphed into. They morphed into Daesh, into IS, into so many other groups, and practically half of Syria was gone, went into the hands of these non-state actors. But I think Russia then managed, Russia and Iran managed to stand by the Syrian government, and with the result that now most of the territories have been freed, and one would hope that somehow all major stakeholders, indirect stakeholders, converge on some point at least in stopping the bombing of the areas, and also pulling support withdrawing support from the non-state actors who have been fighting the Syrian government. So if that happens, only then can we hope some sort of end, a seizure of hostilities against the people of Syria.
So there's also a perception, would you agree with it, that Syria is basically being used as a battleground for a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the sectarian element is also being used to further their own political agendas. Is that true, sir? And if it's the case, then where do you see any light at the end of the tunnel?
I think that's true, because it did turn into a sectarian crisis, and the people who have been killed, I mean,
the sectarianism crisis is just a veneer or a cover or the facade.
No.
There is something else brewing below.
Actually, when the Saudis and the Turks and USA, they tried to oust Bashar al-Assad from the government in Syria, Iranians came in to support them, and later on the Russians also jumped in. But I think this was being seen as an attempt by Saudi Arabia and other Sunni states to oust a Shia president,
So that came later. Initially, when the Arab Spring started in 2011,
but
it was not a sectarian war at
very
the time.
soon it turned into a proxy war. And as a result of that, over 400,000 people have been killed, and hundreds of thousands of them have been displaced. And many of them have sought refuge or still seeking refuge in Western countries and other neighboring countries, including Turkey. So this is a huge humanitarian crisis. And I believe that the Islamic world should be able to, although I don't see any chances of that, but the Islamic world should intervene and stop this sectarian side of the tragedy and bring some kind of reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia so that this bloodshed should stop there. Enough blood has been shed in the last 7, 8, 9 years, but that doesn't seem to be a possibility there. But the big powers like United States of America, Russia, the United Nations also, they are involved, they're a player. And they have been trying to bring about a reconciliation there, to bring about a ceasefire.
That was my question, sir, that there have been a number of attempts, the Astana process, then Sochi and so on, 4 or 5 attempts, but unfortunately no results have been yielded. Sir.
No results, yes.
Why do you think, sir? I mean, despite the well-intentioned efforts of the world powers, we are not able to come to any kind of a solution?
Well, there is a big difference in the stated intent and the actual intent, what lies behind. So I'm pretty sure that there's much more than sees the eye, and there are these geopolitical differences basically at the heart of continued hostilities, and somehow the Syria has become the battleground for the proxies of Saudi Arabia and its Western allies, as well as Russia and its allies in the region. So they shall have to basically overcome these differences. You know, I don't know. I don't see really any end to it. The West and Saudi Arabia, they I think have refused basically to accept that they committed a blunder, and that blunder resulted in a human tragedy, and somehow they want to. They don't appear ready to extricate themselves from this crisis, and also extricate themselves from the responsibility.
Well, if you look at the Arab Spring overall, sir, would you say that it has been a good thing for the Middle East? This whole democratic project, has it yielded any benefit to the people of the area, of the region, sir?
Well, look, you know, this Arab Spring was more like a reflection of the desire for democracy in these societies. But if you look at them deep down, most of them are very much tribal in nature. So the imposing this concept of democracy, I think, was a big mistake. I mean, see whether we can enforce democracy in Afghanistan or even in our own province, Balochistan. You know, it's something very alien to the deeply entrenched social attitudes. The same is the case with Tunisia, with Algeria, with Egypt itself, who are all still dominated and driven by tribal culture. So this conflation of the tribal culture, then Islamic ethos, and then this external effort to impose democracy has basically played havoc with the local societies, and all the jubilation, the exuberance, you know, that we saw in February 2011 with the events unfolding in Egypt, followed by then what happened to Gaddafi, and it was actually it's very, very tragic the way things have gone on, and I don't think.
What does it say about the entire democratic project itself, sir? We've got Donald
It's
Trump.
a failure.
We've got Donald Trump saying that know maybe we should follow the Chinese when Mr. Xi Jinping is now being considered for being the leader for life.
Yeah, basically because it boils down to the socio-political ethos of a certain community. They may not be ready for the kind of democracy that Germany or the UK or other countries practice.
So it's
for a country like China,
create the conditions that support democracy.
It primarily is tied to the socio-political and socio-economic conditions. So if the people are starving, they won't be looking for democracy if they are starving. So their fundamental needs of the people are jobs, livelihoods. So if they don't get that, of what good can democratic principle of freedom of information or freedom of expression is? So they really need to have something in the tummy to be able to stand up for their rights. So this is the model that I think China has gone about, with the single party rule there, with a Politburo, with a central Congress, which has very carefully gone about alleviating poverty. They have now this project of alleviating poverty from China by 2020. So these are the ideals that the Xi Jinping set for himself. The other ideal was elimination of corruption within the ranks of the Chinese Socialist Party, Communist Party, and this is what they're going about. They have retrenched, suspended, dismissed thousands of senior level cadres in the army as well as in the bureaucracy, just because this guy was very clear. He had a very clear vision, and he had seen how the party bureaucracy was eating into the vitals of the society, how the People's Liberation Army generals and senior officers were abusing their authority. So by 2020, you will see, I think, a different China. Although one wouldn't agree, with the way the time limit or the time bar on the China's president and party secretary general being removed, it doesn't augur well. It should not happen this way. But China has its own wisdom to go by. They don't need our wisdom.
That's very true, sir. Javeed Sahab, let's also talk about what kind of profound effects might take place beyond Syria's borders. Jordan and other countries that are bordering Syria are already hosting a large number of refugee population. Then there's the influx of refugees in the West. So all these problems are being compounded, and of course the Europeans, who are also very afraid, or rather xenophobic, how are they going to be dealing with this entire aspect? What other issues can sort of be a spillover effect of the war?
I think it's very unfortunate. The crisis that emerged in Syria and elsewhere in the Islamic world, in Middle East, following this so-called Arab Spring, and the countries around that region, they became unstable, and war broke out, factional fights. We have seen many leaders being removed from power, but ultimately democracy or democratic system was not there in place. I mean, they have not been able to evolve a democratic system or establish a democratic dispensation in their countries. The result was complete chaos in those countries. And because of that, this massive migration started, and people started, an exodus of people started from there. And many Western countries refuse to accept refugees from Syria and other Islamic countries for reasons that they are not fit to live in Western societies, or they might have a kind of negative impact on those societies which are liberal Western societies. So they refuse to take refugees, although countries like Canada, they opened their doors for them, but many Western countries are still reluctant to take them. Unfortunately, we do not have, the Islamic countries do not have a platform or a mechanism to resolve the crisis within the Islamic world. And now we are looking towards US and Russia
or the
United Nations and other world powers or bodies to intervene and find some solution to this crisis. In fact, it is a crisis of the Islamic world. And the Islamic world, because of the lack of leadership, because of lack of vision and lack of capacity and capability to resolve the crisis within their fold, the other parties have to intervene, and they are still intervening, and that is complicating the situation further. My suggestion or my desire is that the Islamic world and the platforms that are available in the Islamic world should be able to, address the situation, to address this crisis, rather than looking towards the Western world or other United Nations and other bodies to come and solve the crisis. But unfortunately, we don't have that ability to do it, and that's why the other countries, they're accepting these people. Yes, so many of them, many refugees have been accepted by Western countries, but then there's a capacity to absorb a huge, massive migration to those countries. So they have their own reservations as well. So let's hope that the Islamic leadership will be able to rise to the occasion, and they will be able to solve this crisis, which is essentially a crisis within the Islamic world. And
would you say that's a hope in hell, sir?
Yeah.
Well, moving on, let's talk about the fact that 66,000 refugees returned to Syria, sir, according to the UNHCR. But what were they returning to? There's no future for the people of Syria within Syria. If you look at what's been happening in Ghouta, Eastern Ghouta, again we are seeing a massive humanitarian problem taking place. Children being murdered, killed in the streets. And
bombing.
The entire world is just basically just looking like silent spectators, and nobody seems to care.
Yeah, because the world has seen so many crises, and every time there's a crisis, whether it's in Afghanistan or Pakistan or somewhere in Africa or in Syria, then all the governments, really have to, they are called on to pool in their resources, to take care of this. So I think with the passage of time, a certain indifference also creeps into the people's and governments' minds, and that's why even in the case of Afghan refugees in Pakistan, I think 4 or 5 years ago, the world community had promised about $600 million for the Afghan refugees to take care of them, also help them return to their country. But we were told that hardly $150 million have been provided to the Pakistan government for that objective. So under $450 million are still outstanding. So this on account of just the Afghan refugees. So imagine the kind of burden that the UNHCR is now taking. It's I think in Somalia,
there was a CIA
Yemen,
program that was training fighters in Syria, which spent $500 million and trained 60 fighters. Then they had to shut that down.
Yeah, I mean, these stories of massive corruption, I think they're all over. If you look at what the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan's rehabilitation has been writing about, that the CIA and the American military establishment has been simply throwing money at people without much accountability, and there are things they did things for $500 million which could have been done in for $5 million. So it's the same, and you train 60 fighters for a massive sum of $500 or $600 million. So these are very, I think, typical, known, familiar stories.
Very, very sad, sir. But we'll leave it at that. There's not much we can really say about it, sir. But thank you very much for taking out the time and sharing your views with PTV World. Before we end the program, we'd also like to show you this heart-wrenching image of a little child who crossed the entire desert as a refugee. And when he arrived, he was carrying his mother and his sister's clothes in a bag, who had been killed. And here's another image. And if these images are not enough to shake the conscience of this world, then I don't think that there's much hope for humanity. And on that sad note, it's goodbye.